There comes a moment when the noise fades and the mirror speaks back with uncomfortable honesty. The greatest battles are not fought in crowds or won by applause. They are waged quietly within the soul. Every doubt you've carried, every fear you've hidden, every promise you postponed stands across from your courage and your truth. This is the space where excuses dissolve and accountability takes shape. Growth begins when comparison dies and self-awareness rises. You are not competing with history or circumstance, but with the version of yourself that settled for less, waiting to be challenged by the strength you've always carried inside. Facing your own excuses and limitations is the most honest and demanding battle you will ever fight, because the greatest obstacles are rarely external. Excuses are comfortable stories we tell ourselves to protect ego, avoid discomfort, or delay responsibility. Limitations are often exaggerated, inherited, or self-imposed, shaped by fear, past failure, or comparison rather than reality. When you confront these internal barriers, denial dissolves and truth takes its place. This truth is uncomfortable because it removes the illusion that someone or something else is responsible for where you stand. Facing excuses requires brutal self-awareness. You must observe patterns of avoidance, procrastination, and justification without defense. Each excuse has a purpose, and understanding that purpose reveals what you fear losing or confronting. Once exposed, excuses lose their power because they thrive in secrecy and rationalization. Limitations also demand scrutiny. Many are not fixed boundaries but temporary conditions mistaken for permanent truths. When you test them through action, their authority weakens. Facing limitations does not mean ignoring reality. It means separating what is truly impossible from what is merely uncomfortable. This distinction is where growth begins. Self-honesty builds discipline because progress can only be built on truth. When excuses are removed, effort becomes the only option. This shift is liberating because it places control back in your hands. You no longer wait for permission, motivation, or perfect conditions. You act based on commitment rather than mood. Facing excuses also strengthens character. Each moment of honesty reinforces integrity, creating alignment between intention and behavior. Limitations confronted become opportunities for adaptation, learning, and expansion. You discover new strategies, develop resilience, and gain confidence by proving to yourself that action is possible even when conditions are imperfect. Facing internal resistance also builds emotional strength. Fear, doubt, and insecurity lose their grip when they are acknowledged rather than avoided. You learn to coexist with discomfort without being controlled by it. This emotional resilience becomes a foundation for consistent effort. Facing excuses reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstance and start recognizing your role as the architect of your choices. This shift increases self-respect because accountability replaces helplessness. Each time you choose action over excuse, you reinforce belief in your own capability. Limitations confronted through effort expand capacity. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable through repetition. Each challenge faced builds confidence grounded in experience rather than optimism. Facing excuses also clarifies priorities. When justifications disappear, what remains is what truly matters. Energy is redirected from explanation to execution. Focus sharpens and progress accelerates. Self-confrontation is not about self-criticism. It is about self-responsibility. It is the willingness to acknowledge shortcomings without surrendering to them. This balance preserves motivation while encouraging growth. Facing your own excuses also cultivates independence. You stop seeking external validation or permission because progress becomes internally driven. This autonomy strengthens resolve and consistency. Over time, confronting excuses and limitations becomes a habit. Awareness increases, action follows more quickly, and self-trust deepens. The internal dialogue shifts from "why not" to "how can I?" Each honest confrontation strengthens discipline, resilience, and confidence. This process transforms inner resistance into inner authority. By facing excuses and limitations directly, you reclaim control over effort, direction, and outcome, shaping a version of yourself that is accountable, capable, and unwilling to settle for comfort over growth. Replacing comparison with self-accountability is one of the most transformative steps toward personal growth, because the habit of measuring yourself against others drains focus, diminishes confidence, and distorts priorities. Comparison is an easy trap to fall into. It is reinforced by social standards, achievements of peers, and the curated images of success that surround us. When you constantly look outward for validation or benchmarks, your energy is spent reacting to external standards rather than building internal strength. Self-accountability redirects that energy inward. It asks a simple but demanding question: am I doing everything I can to honor my own potential? Accountability is personal, measurable, and under your control. While comparison relies on shifting circumstances, self-accountability depends entirely on your choices, effort, and consistency. It turns focus from envy and distraction into clarity and purpose. When comparison is replaced with accountability, responsibility replaces blame. Failures are no longer excused by observing someone else's advantage, and success is no longer dependent on outperforming others. Instead, the emphasis is on effort, alignment, and integrity. Each action is measured against your own standards rather than the accomplishments of someone else. This shift fosters discipline because progress becomes habitual rather than competitive. It encourages intentionality in every decision, prioritizing behaviors that lead toward long-term growth rather than temporary validation. Accountability also builds resilience. When setbacks occur, you are less likely to be demoralized by someone else's success because your benchmark is your own improvement. Each challenge becomes an opportunity to refine strategy, increase effort, and strengthen commitment. This internal focus reduces emotional volatility. Comparison often triggers jealousy, insecurity, and distraction, whereas accountability fosters calm, purpose-driven action. Over time, the mental clarity gained from self-accountability allows for better planning, more strategic choices, and greater efficiency. Self-accountability also cultivates authenticity. When you measure yourself against your own standards rather than public perception, actions become aligned with values and long-term objectives. This alignment creates confidence because progress is real, measurable, and earned, not borrowed from imitation or superficial metrics. Accountability strengthens character because it demands honesty. You must evaluate effort, admit mistakes, and take corrective action without deflection. This practice develops integrity, resilience, and self-trust. Replacing comparison with accountability also encourages patience. Growth cannot be rushed, and the achievements of others do not dictate your pace. By focusing on your own journey, you can honor your rhythm while steadily progressing. Self-accountability amplifies learning because each success and failure is clearly attributed to effort, strategy, or decision-making. There is no ambiguity, no scapegoat. Lessons are visible and actionable, allowing continuous refinement. This practice also builds autonomy. Dependence on external validation diminishes because internal standards become the primary measure of progress. Confidence and motivation increasingly come from self-awareness and consistent effort rather than applause or recognition. Over time, the practice of self-accountability transforms mindset and identity. You begin to define yourself by effort, growth, and alignment with your values rather than external comparison. Habits solidify, resilience strengthens, and confidence becomes grounded in reality rather than perception. Replacing comparison with self-accountability turns distraction into focus, envy into purpose, and passivity into action. It ensures that energy is invested where it matters most, in consistent effort, honest evaluation, and deliberate improvement. This internal orientation creates a foundation for sustained growth, mastery, and the development of a self-driven, empowered version of yourself who measures success by personal standards rather than the shifting achievements of the world around you. Disciplining the mind to overcome inner resistance is the cornerstone of personal transformation because the greatest obstacles rarely come from the outside. They emerge from hesitation, fear, and self-doubt. Inner resistance is subtle but relentless, manifesting as procrastination, rationalization, distraction, or avoidance. It whispers that the effort is too great, that failure is inevitable, or that comfort is preferable to growth. Every person encounters these barriers, yet those who achieve greatness have learned to recognize, confront, and rise above them. Discipline is the bridge that connects intention with action, converting desire into tangible results. The first step in disciplining the mind is awareness, acknowledging the moments when resistance appears, identifying its triggers, and observing its patterns without judgment. Resistance often disguises itself as reasonable hesitation or a call to rest, yet it thrives on inaction. By recognizing its presence, you interrupt its subtle influence and reclaim control. Overcoming inner resistance requires consistency. It is not enough to act sporadically when motivation is high. True discipline emerges when effort continues despite fatigue, doubt, or fear. Daily repetition of deliberate actions trains the mind to prioritize purpose over comfort. Discipline also strengthens decision-making. When resistance appears, the disciplined mind evaluates options through the lens of goals and values rather than impulse or emotion. This clarity reduces wasted energy and ensures that actions are aligned with long-term growth rather than short-term relief. Confronting inner resistance builds resilience. Each act of effort against hesitation reinforces the capacity to endure, adapt, and persist under pressure. Resistance becomes less intimidating over time because the mind learns that discomfort is temporary while progress is cumulative. Mental discipline also enhances focus. The mind is naturally drawn to distraction, novelty, and avoidance. By training attention to remain on tasks that matter, clarity deepens and efficiency increases. This focused effort accelerates progress while diminishing the influence of fear or uncertainty. Disciplining the mind also strengthens emotional control. Resistance often triggers anxiety, frustration, or self-criticism. A disciplined mind observes these emotions without surrendering to them, allowing thoughtful action to replace reactive behavior. Over time, emotional stability becomes a natural consequence of consistent practice. Inner resistance challenges identity by questioning capability and worth. Each act of discipline reaffirms self-trust, proving that you are capable of persistence, adaptation, and growth even when circumstances are difficult or uncomfortable. Discipline transforms failure into feedback rather than a verdict. Resistance teaches the mind to tolerate discomfort and uncertainty while seeking solutions and taking action. This approach cultivates creativity and problem-solving because the mind is no longer paralyzed by fear but guided by purpose. Disciplining the mind also encourages long-term thinking. Short-term satisfaction often tempts surrender, yet persistent effort creates compounding results that far outweigh immediate comfort. Patience becomes part of mental training, and delayed gratification becomes manageable. The process builds autonomy because reliance on external motivation diminishes. A disciplined mind generates its own momentum, consistently driving action toward goals without needing constant reinforcement or recognition. Over time, the repeated confrontation with inner resistance reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone easily swayed by fear or comfort and start seeing yourself as capable, resilient, and determined. Habits of persistence, focus, and deliberate effort become internalized, and mental toughness becomes second nature. By disciplining the mind to overcome inner resistance, hesitation is replaced with action, fear is replaced with courage, and potential is transformed into measurable achievement, creating a version of yourself that moves forward relentlessly despite doubt, distraction, or discomfort. Turning self-doubt into self-mastery is a process that requires courage, consistency, and relentless self-awareness, because doubt is one of the most persistent barriers to growth. Self-doubt whispers that you are not enough, that failure is inevitable, and that your dreams are too big for your abilities. It thrives in silence, feeding on hesitation, comparison, and fear of judgment. Left unchecked, it erodes confidence, paralyzes action, and stifles potential. But when faced deliberately, self-doubt can become a teacher, a mirror, and ultimately a catalyst for mastery. The first step is acknowledgement. Recognizing self-doubt without judgment allows you to examine its origins and separate reality from fear-driven perception. Doubt often exaggerates weakness, magnifies uncertainty, and ignores past successes, creating a distorted lens through which potential is evaluated. By identifying these distortions, the mind gains clarity, and rational action can replace reactive hesitation. Transforming self-doubt into self-mastery requires disciplined action. Confidence is rarely spontaneous. It is built through consistent effort, incremental victories, and the repeated choice to act despite discomfort. Each step taken against fear reinforces the belief that capability exists even when certainty does not. Self-mastery emerges when action becomes habitual and deliberate, turning hesitation into momentum and anxiety into preparation. Reflection is also critical. After each challenge, examine performance honestly and extract lessons rather than feeding blame or regret. This reflective practice strengthens judgment, hones decision-making, and cultivates a mindset that sees obstacles as opportunities for refinement rather than proof of inadequacy. Over time, repeated confrontation with self-doubt trains the mind to tolerate uncertainty. The uncomfortable sensation of inadequacy becomes manageable, recognized as temporary rather than permanent. This tolerance builds resilience, enabling consistent progress under pressure, criticism, or unpredictable conditions. Turning self-doubt into self-mastery also requires reframing failure. Each mistake, each misstep becomes data rather than judgment. By learning to extract insight instead of shame, the mind grows stronger and more adaptive. Mastery is not about eliminating doubt entirely, but about refusing to let it dictate action, priorities, or identity. Self-doubt often challenges identity, whispering that you are incapable or unworthy. By taking action despite this internal opposition, you prove to yourself that worth and capability are defined by effort and integrity rather than perception or circumstance. Discipline also strengthens emotional regulation. Self-doubt often triggers anxiety, stress, or impulsivity. Mastery emerges when emotions are observed without being controlled by them, allowing calm, deliberate, and strategic action. Persistence is essential. Self-mastery is built through repetition, patience, and the willingness to act consistently even when results are uncertain or slow to appear. Small victories accumulate, reinforcing competence and diminishing fear. Surrounding oneself with accountability, structure, and deliberate practice further accelerates this transformation. Self-mastery is also cultivated through self-compassion. Recognizing that doubt is a natural human experience prevents harsh self-criticism and allows energy to be directed toward action and growth rather than rumination. Each acknowledgement of capability, however small, strengthens self-belief and reinforces a pattern of resilience. Over time, self-doubt becomes a companion rather than an enemy, signaling areas for attention without controlling behavior. Identity shifts from fragile and reactive to capable, grounded, and resilient. Habits of reflection, deliberate action, and emotional regulation become internalized, producing a consistent capacity to act with purpose. By turning self-doubt into self-mastery, hesitation becomes momentum, fear becomes strategy, and uncertainty becomes a foundation for strength, creating a version of yourself that moves forward with clarity, confidence, and unshakable resilience, regardless of internal or external challenge. Becoming better than who you were yesterday is the essence of personal evolution, because the most meaningful competition is not against others, but against your past self. Every choice, every habit, every action creates a version of you that either moves closer to potential or remains trapped in limitation. Progress is rarely dramatic. It is incremental, built from consistent effort, reflection, and courage. Improvement requires honesty. You must examine yesterday without judgment, acknowledging both success and failure, while refusing to cling to either as permanent. Every setback carries a lesson. Every small victory becomes a building block. Growth demands deliberate action. Complacency thrives in comfort, but transformation requires discomfort, challenge, and persistence. Comparing today to yesterday rather than to someone else allows clarity. You measure effort, consistency, and learning rather than external markers of achievement. This internal focus fosters discipline because the yardstick is always visible and actionable. You know precisely where you started, what you achieved, and what remains. Incremental improvement also cultivates resilience. When progress is measured against self rather than others, setbacks are reframed as data rather than judgment. Mistakes become opportunities for refinement, and obstacles become a test of commitment rather than proof of inadequacy. Becoming better than yesterday requires patience. True growth is not instantaneous. It is a compound process that unfolds through daily practice and conscious effort. Small improvements, repeated consistently, create momentum that eventually produces transformation. Self-reflection is essential. Each day, examining actions, habits, and mindset allows identification of areas for growth and reinforcement of behaviors that support progress. This reflective practice strengthens self-awareness, helping you make intentional choices rather than reacting to circumstance. The process of improving daily also strengthens accountability. You begin to own every decision, action, and habit, recognizing their cumulative impact. Excuses lose power because progress is measurable and observable. Discipline grows because effort is the only variable that determines whether today surpasses yesterday. Developing this mindset also nurtures humility. Improvement is a lifelong journey. There is always another day to learn, another challenge to overcome, and another layer of potential to uncover. Humility ensures that growth is continuous rather than self-congratulatory. It allows openness to feedback, learning, and adaptation. Becoming better than yesterday also fosters gratitude. Recognizing small wins, incremental progress, and lessons learned builds appreciation for the journey rather than fixation on an idealized destination. Gratitude reinforces motivation because effort is acknowledged even before outcomes fully materialize. Focus intensifies when the benchmark is internal. The mind is no longer distracted by comparison, envy, or social expectation. Energy is preserved for deliberate action, reflection, and improvement. Habits play a crucial role. Daily practices, repeated with intention, compound into measurable advancement. Each small choice, consistently executed, becomes a foundation for higher capability, stronger discipline, and greater confidence. Emotional strength grows because improvement requires persistence despite discomfort, doubt, and fear. You learn to act even when motivation wanes, and to trust the process over immediate reward. Over time, identity transforms. You begin to see yourself as a person defined by effort, resilience, and continuous evolution rather than circumstance or limitation. Each day's progress, however small, becomes a confirmation of potential realized and a challenge for further growth. By committing to become better than who you were yesterday, hesitation gives way to action, fear gives way to courage, and potential is actualized into achievement, creating a life of consistent growth, self-mastery, and unstoppable personal evolution.